So before we start talking about community and strengthening youth, it'd be interesting to hear from everybody about how you actually started in on your own arts practice. Who wants to start? And actually, and just as a note for both people on the panel and in the audience, we do sort of less of the question and answer thing, and feel free to interject, which might be just like a conversation.
Can I start? Because I don't really recognize myself as an artist, actually. I look at myself as a historian of my own cultural history, which we've been doing for thousands of years through visual representation, ceremony, and oral history, storytelling. So I find that even though I may be doing that in a contemporary sense, I'm still speaking about issues in my surroundings that directly affect me. So other people might classify it as performance or sculpture or installation, but I really just see it as a form of documentation of history.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, okay. So, hi everybody. I'd just like to say honored to be here as a guest and to the people of this land. I'm grateful that you welcomed me. Also grateful to the city of Edmonton, the Creative Summit, and everybody that's involved in this. I'm honored. Thank you very much. My journey started back when I was learning English as a third language. People used to make fun of me a lot. They used to call me an FOB, which meant fresh off the boat. And then my English teacher empowered me to learn the English language. He said the best form of revenge is success. So I decided to succeed in the language, and then I learned that I was actually an FOP, fresh off the plane. And then the Europeans that first came here were FOBs. And I'm like, language is powerful, and so I just delved right into it.
Amazing. Well, I guess I'm fresh off the plane as well, because I was actually born in Liverpool, and we actually came to Edmonton as well first when we moved from England. And I think my love of hip-hop also comes from that area where when I was a kid I spoke with a stutter, and that didn't go over well in my English London very theatrical family, and so I was taught Queen's English and made to go to the speech academy, and RADA is actually where I learned how to articulate like crazy, and that actually is what carried over into my love of poetry and music. But for the work that I do now as a hip-hop artist, I actually hated hip-hop growing up. I was the person that my little brother always quoted the Public Enemy, where he's like, listen to this music, and it was Public Enemy, and it was black man, black woman, black baby. And I was like, what are these guys talking about? Like, I didn't get the music, I didn't understand any of it until I met my first black friends in Victoria. Growing up in Victoria, I was very white. I was the only person of color in my whole school, like 1,500 kids. And it was falling in love with like learning how to have a voice in that small community that really helped me engage and express in the hip hop arts. And also dealing with a lot of trauma, the trauma that most teenagers deal with, struggling to find a place, feeling insecure, not knowing if they're good enough in school, not knowing if they fit in well enough and reach their parents' expectations. All of those things sort of led me to shut down as a teenager, and I found myself in hospitals, and it was there when I started journaling that I realized that, oh, I could just talk about what I'm going through, and that is what transcended into my art and into words. And so that is what I show in youth now, is that it doesn't matter what your story is, everybody has a story, we all have feelings, it's a matter of how you express them. And I think that's the power of writing that and why I use it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting hearing everybody speak, because I think sometimes when we frame these conversations, art is like this external thing that we're going to be engaging with. Whereas what we actually discover, especially from hearing your stories, is that there's so much personal strength that comes from your practice and from having a connection to it. So, what is this idea of strength? Like, how do we become strong? How do we create strength? Where does that come from?
In my personal opinion, especially with the youth that I work with, I try to tell them that strength comes from within. We believe in communities. We have a system of youth who hang out with elders and stuff like that in some other community. It doesn't happen as much in Canada, but that's what happened in Somalia. In my honest opinion, I tell the youth, strength is your individuality. One thing that Kia was saying that I really liked, everybody's a storyteller. No, everybody has a story, but not everybody's a storyteller, so we empower the youth to tell their story. Their individual story is powerful, because if we look at the world, no one's ever going to come to this world as us. We are authentic creatures. Nobody's ever going to step foot on this planet that is identical to us in experience, genetics. So it's valuable to tell your stories. And I tell them that strength is painting your own image. This world is a museum, and we are walking canvases. If we allow somebody else to paint on us, then that's what we become. But if we paint our own stories and then share our own art, then that's where the strength lies, is that individuality within our community, the individual difference that makes us all different, but at the same time. And for me, that's where strength comes from, is being yourself, or recognizing that we're all different and helping each other out.
For me, I think a lot of my strength has just come from resilience and overcoming a lot of obstacles, a more survival mentality. And so when I look around at now how I'm a healthy individual that's able to have these conversations up here today, and my obligations and responsibilities to the community, that I think just because someone doesn't succeed doesn't mean that they don't have strength. I think it means that they don't have the proper support. And so when I think about my community and the community at large around here in the Lower Mainland, I also think about how us as society, we are only as powerful as our most vulnerable people in our society. And just walking outside of here and just over, there's homelessness right across the street. So kind of bringing those things to the forefront, it's not necessarily a weakness, but rather I feel a failure on our part to address and do as much as we can to support those people.
A lot of what you said resonates with the reason I sort of wanted to go last, and I wanted to share some lyrics from a youth that I work with in the Burnaby Youth Custody jail. And I did a hip hop program there for a couple of years before I started working as a officer there. And the stories that these kids go through is just unbelievable. And when you want to talk about strength, I think you need to look at the resilience of the things that they've overcome. So I just want to share a couple of words with you guys if you're okay. But this one girl, she's about 12 years old when I met her. This is what she wrote to me. She said, "It all started when I was 7. I first shot up heroin. It made me sick. I was in a daze. I didn't care what anyone had to say. I felt neglected. I felt abused. By 12, I became a prostitute. I felt lost. I'd seen a lot of death. And to help me cope, I turned to meth." Those 8 lines to sum up this whole girl's life and the bravery of her to have to share these things with another group of girls led to the other girls writing this other chorus in response. And they said, "I am a person of survival, but growing up that wasn't my title. A young soul screaming for revival, a young girl who became suicidal." So again, there's one that says, "This is my problem, this is what I've gone through," and the other girl's answer is, "But you know what? We're here now, we're surviving, and we're moving forward." And that is what I really think is strength. The strength is the ability to look back and say, things aren't right, but what have our ancestors in the past done before to move forward and to overcome this pain and to overcome these struggles that we face. So I think strength relies in that.
I just wanted to go along with what you're saying right now. In this, like growing up, I was always taught, be careful of the mistakes you make. But then if you look at our elders, the reason they're so wise is because they made so many mistakes. Like, and a lot of people think about it. I've always said this. I say experience is an accumulation of mistakes, and wisdom is an accumulation of experience. If you want to grow wise, you have to make calculated mistakes. So the youth that went through that, often you hear a lot of that, and you tell them that's fine. What happened in the past is only characteristic of what's going to make you stronger in the future. These are qualities that you can take with you and grow from. That's your soil. That's where you started. Now grow from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question of the strength that can be drawn from those experiences, and it's phenomenal that these young people are able to reflect on these experiences in such a way and actually turn it into strength. I mean, that takes a lot of wisdom at 12 years old. But putting this into sort of the context of a community, these youth are obviously part of a larger whole, and it often occurs to me that when we apply the notions of strength and art to community, that sometimes a community doesn't actually know what its own strengths are, right? Or in some cases, fully aware or fully connected with what its weaknesses are. So in many cases, you have young people like this that are now involved in some sort of arts practice. You have others that are doing amazing things, and the community at large or the structures we live in don't necessarily realize that they have these strengths to rest on, or that they have these strengths that they can actually, further empower. And in fact, sometimes, we kind of seek to package those into, better known structures. And some of this came up in our conversation earlier, but I'd love to kind of hear you guys talk about, what your sort of approach to community has been through this, and what your experience has been in your arts practice.
Well, for me, community has always been, like I said, the musicians and the artists that surround us. And I think any of you that know, in the music world, you tend to flock and stick towards other musicians. And I think when we think about community, it's the same sort of thing. We always seem to stick with what's familiar rather than explore what's unfamiliar and what's uncomfortable. And so when I think about building strength in community, especially with youth, I think we need to look at the things that are not what's easy. And we have to have the conversations about race. We have to have the conversations that make us all feel a bit uncomfortable and say, oh, well, what is white privilege in this situation? What is the history of this area? These communities, even the things of recognizing the territories correctly, recognizing these are things that we take for granted in passing. It's like, oh, we made a little mistake, but this is something that can be very endearing to someone like Roxanne, who's just like, well, wait a second, how are we going to talk about community when we don't know who was here before us, and how are we going to define how that moves us forward? We can't erase the mistakes of the past. We can't change, colonialism and rewrite the whole book on it, but we can change the history that's taught, and we see that, evident in the schools, the changes in the school system and studies, and in retelling the truth of residential schools and the history of our province. But it's sort of not enough to recognize it and move on. We kind of need to find ways to really do the healing. And I think that that's something, when I think of community, I think of the healing that has to happen from these conversations that are uncomfortable.
I think when I think about community, immediately I think about my immediate community at home. But then I think about my surrounding community, and then on a larger level, a global community. And I honestly feel a connection to all of those things equally, as well as the non-human community of the environment and animals and all that sort of life-giving and life-sustaining things. With me, I choose to volunteer in my community, so any financial honorariums that I receive, I donate back in the form of programming, and I usually try to double or the money that was given. So I've created a canoe program through my community that we brought to life a lot of oral history and stories through visual representation, so that we could, the kids could really understand and have something tangible. We heard Sal speak about that tangibility of visual or other sort of things to arts or concepts. And so for me, that canoe was not just intended for the semi-young people, but that canoe was a vessel of connection to the community surrounding. So it's intended to be used within the school districts, it's intended to be used with the city, it's intended to be used with artists, with anybody who kind of wants to engage and learn about the history of the place. And one of the reasons why is I volunteer for the city of Surrey, I volunteer for the city of White Rock, so why wouldn't I volunteer for my own community? So I really look at community as a really wide spectrum.
Community, for me, has many different meanings. There's a lot of different communities that I'm involved in. I'm a privileged person who gets to sit here and tell you about my community. It's one thing, but where I come from, my people, often art isn't really valued because people are still trying to survive. How do you thrive if you're not even surviving? A lot of times people are thinking about their 9-to-5s. When I first started doing poetry, and I told my mom, before I even did poetry, I used to do stand-up comedy. She's like, no, you're not gonna make no money. I'm like, fine, Mom, if you don't want that, I won't do it. And then I went into poetry. She's like, poetry, don't do that. And then I'm like, well, I should become an engineer, a doctor, or a lawyer. I said, why do you want me to become these things, Mom? She's like, you'll be more secure. And I'm like, Mom, but mental health is more valuable to me than financial security. Like I can be financially secure and be unhealthy mentally. And then my mom's like, just go, whatever I do. So I went to university. And then I remember I dropped out of university to follow my career, which is to do poetry and comedy. And at first my mom was very hesitant, but I remember the thing that really changed my mother, and this involves community, is I brought my mom to a different community. I brought her to a Mother's Day event where there were like 300 mothers. And they asked me to recite a poem I wrote for my mother. My mom doesn't understand English thoroughly. She understands it, communication, but doesn't understand the depth of English. And so I recited this poem, and all the mothers were crying. And my mother looked at them, and then she started crying. And ever since that day, it changed because I realized I took my mom from the community she was comfortable with, which was the Somali women, and brought her into a community that valued mothers as a whole. So my job as a person is I'm just trying to bridge different communities. I've always said this before, and I said the professional world is like mountain climbing. The higher up you go, the wider and lonelier it gets. And in all honesty, my duty is to make sure that my presence is just as important as anybody else's. And so I shift between many different communities, but like Roxanne, whenever I'm invited to do something about National Refugee Day, they ask me to work with a bunch of youth who are from Iran, Syria, Somalia, and I say, you know what, I'll do it for free. And I always do it for free because we don't understand the more you give, the more you get back. Kindness is a language that's been lost. And so I just transcend through these different communities, and just so I can be like almost like a beacon to carry different lights between different situations.
I mean, I can't, while we're talking about parents, you know, there's a certain practicality, I think, to, you know, hearing you guys talk about art and your practice of it and the way you're applying it, because it isn't, you know, it doesn't sound like it's just necessarily a journey of self-exploration or interpretation. There's a real specific kind of societal justice-focused application of that art. And that's something that, I mean, I've struggled with as well. Like Ken mentioned earlier that, you know, years ago we started the Bhangra Festival. And that was potentially one of the strengths of the community. But our issue always was with like grant applications and everything else we were doing was we were always trying to reduce ourselves and shove this weirdly shaped peg into a round hole that just never fit. Whereas what we would have loved is for somebody to recognize us and just say, here's the strength of the community. Let's just double down on whatever they're doing, even though we don't understand it. So I'd like to kind of discuss, you know, what your I guess definition or ever evolving definition of art has been. Like, you know, what's been your understanding of it, and what's been your sort of connection through art with the various bodies, you know, that tell us what art is and what boxes to tick on and application forms.
It's funny you mentioned grants and stuff like that. People don't recognize this, but grants are often oppressive, and they make people do stuff and make communities fight amongst each other for opportunities. A lot of times, if you want to strengthen a community, go into your community. Find the people who are doing work and champion them. Like, that's the difference. A lot of times there are people that are in very affluent, strong positions, and they want to make a difference by giving out grants and by giving out awards. In all honesty, if you go to their community, you partake in any type of art, watch their art, you have done just about as much as somebody who's giving out a grant. Because a lot of times grants are telling you you have to fit this in, we need a quota, this is what you need to do. But if you want to strengthen a community, I've never applied for a grant. Zero. My full-time income comes from art. How do I do it? I go into places and I make sure that I'm asking for the funds that are necessary for an artist. I do that groundwork, and then I bring other artists and I say, hey, yo, they just paid me, you might get some money here real quick. And that's the difference, it's community partnerships, and we're talking about grants. So for me, art is a very loose term because where I come from in Somalia, the oral tradition is valued. I do a lot of literary poetry, I'm publishing many things, I'm taught in schools and stuff like that. But to me, what really matters is art that gives self-reflection and bring community together. Like I said, we're canvases. We should walk around and appreciate each other as art, because we are art, regardless of where you come from.
Well, I'm going to school for a Master of Fine Arts, but I'm
Don't feel bad.
I'm Surrey also doing graduate anthropology. And one of the reasons is the truth and reconciliation. And I know that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I know that a lot of work's being done with good intention, but I have a tremendous fear of the institutionalization of Indigenous knowledge. And so in the system that we live in today, it requires that I have social equity in form of education, Western education. And so what I've been trying to do is find the most flexible way that I can maintain my culture and my teachings and assert the knowledge that I already have to protect the transmission of that knowledge and the preservation of that knowledge. Because I feel that there's a real belief, like we look at salvage anthropology, that we had to take away the objects in order to preserve that so that could be here for future generations. Well, my daughter has been weaving since she's 5, so it hasn't been lost, and the knowledge hasn't been lost, and that hasn't been documented in books and everything, and it's managed to survive, and if anything, continues to be reviving at a rapid rate, I would say, in language even. So for me, I don't look at, like, I look at, I guess, art as a form of self-expression that's been taking place since the beginning of time. That's how I would look at it.
I think it's interesting because I didn't go to university. I'm completely self-taught as a musician and as a hip-hop artist, as a poet, and I think when we look at art, I compare it to a culture. And hip-hop culture is a great example of that, in that it has all these different elements. We have dance, we have graffiti art, we have the spoken word, we have the music, and they all form to create something that is an identity and an expression, just as Roxanne has said. But I think that, when I first started rapping, everyone always would be like, yo, yeah, and they had like baggy pants and things like that. And I was like, why are you talking to me like that? Like, I'm from Victoria. I am the whitest black person that you are ever gonna meet. And so it wasn't until I actually understood why people embrace the culture, and the reason that I think, and there's a great documentary done by Shad right now, The Evolution of Hip Hop, that really looks at a lot of the social political situations that were happening at the time that these movements started. And I think art is really the voice of those movements, whether it's Black Power movement, Black Lives Matter, whether it's to do with Indigenous revivals and reconciliation. In all of these things, the art is just the voice of the people of the community, the people of the struggle, and that comes through in visual art, it comes through in words, it comes through in dance, and I think that's why it's so important when we tell youth to embrace arts. It's really just telling them to embrace themselves, but telling them to embrace their communities, telling them to embrace their families, and all of those things make up the art. It's not just the product, it's the process.
I was going to say, it's funny because there are so many different boxes that people have to fit into. Just to go as an example as the poet route for a second, I do a lot of spoken word poetry. I'll go to places where people are educated in poetry, and they'll welcome me and oh, here comes an African poet. And I look at them, I'm like, my poems barely, I don't even cover Africa in my poems, right? Like, I don't call you the bird poet or the river poet. Like, I don't do these things. But it happens a lot in the system. So that's why the youth, whenever I tell them, if you believe you are something, be it. Don't look for validation, because they're not going to give it to you. Just a quick example, when the poet Rory was up here earlier and we saw the acronym, I was like, yes! Because that's not your standard poetry, that's creating your own. That's what art, in school we were taught, study Shakespeare. Shakespeare made words up. How am I going to study from a guy who didn't want to study from anybody else? It makes no sense. You want me to write like Shakespeare, but Shakespeare made his own words up? It doesn't fit that.
Or stole other people.
Or stole other people's work, and you want me to learn about this dude, right? And that's the funny thing about art, until you create your own art. I remember this one time I went to a school in an area of Edmonton, and it was predominantly white. And so I went with one of my good friends who was poet laureate at the time, and we went, and when I was signing into the school, like a good human being I am, I signed in, right? I went to the front to sign in, and my mother walks around the corner, she goes, oh! I'm like, no, you're kidding me, right? Like, this is not real. I came to that school for art, and I'm an artist. I see myself as an artist, but she didn't see me as an artist, right? She saw what other people painted me as. So I go, we do our thing. I was like, forget about it, I'm gonna ignore it, it's stupid, I'm gonna go and do my thing. I did my thing, performed for the class. One kid was wearing a Metallica shirt, comes up, he's like, oh my God, I never knew you went through that type of stuff. I really enjoyed that, I never heard it before, thank you. yes, humanity saved. And then we go to the cafeteria. We go to the cafeteria for lunch. And the principal comes up, puts his foot on that chair, no lie, and goes, Mary, that was some great poetry. Harvey, amazing rap. I didn't rhyme one bit. And I'm like, humanity's lost, man. Like, these are the people that are teaching our youth, and how do we expect our youth to become educated, global-minded citizens? So that's the challenge, is that we need more people who are in there telling them, be yourself, this is what it is.
And that actually, you bring that up because it happens to me in so many different words. So if I'm speaking to a group like a panel like this, then maybe I'm going to say we're going to do spoken word for you. Because if I say I'm going to do rap for you, then you're going to instantly think in a certain different way about what I'm going to present. But if I call the exact same poem a spoken word piece, then you're all going to sit and listen and clap. And so, I'm sure Ahmed and I have faced this in many different ways when you're breaking down stereotypes, and it's the same thing. We can't call graffiti, we have to call it street art, and then all of a sudden it's accepted. It was accepted. The reason that hip-hop music was accepted in New York at the time was because artists in Manhattan at the time discovered graffiti and thought that it was a novel piece of art that was going to be presented in a different way. That was what brought hip-hop music from the Bronx up into downtown Manhattan and across the world. Because people saw the visual aspect and said, hey, this, and why were those people doing that at the beginning? Before tagging came along, people were doing graffiti because the ghettos were so burnt down and ugly and horrible that they needed to beautify their neighborhoods. That was the birth of graffiti. It wasn't the tagging and the things that you associate it with now. And so when we're breaking down these barriers and we do it with young people, it's the same thing. We look at young people with the lens and say, oh, they're young people, so they can't do this, or they can't be that, or they can't, well, we need to start to think about erasing those divides and know that they actually are the ones coming up with the answers for the next phase, right? As Ken said, what are we doing to stand in the way? Why are we standing in the way? They're doing it already. We just need to open the doors and accept it and not put labels on it in the ways that we have in the past.
I learned through my little brothers who were born in Canada but then went to Somalia and came back. The way of our mentality is different. Like, I'm a go-getter, I need to go get, I'm gonna prove this person wrong, I'm gonna go do this. Their mentality was like, I'm just gonna chill, I'm gonna back down, and I always wanted to, no, this is how you do it. And then they taught me to teach other people, that us adults, people who are responsible in positions of power, our job is not to build the youth. We just give them blueprints for them to build themselves. We're not building youth, we're just giving them the tools to build themselves. Too often, people would have had this program, we got this funding, we're gonna do this with the youth. Do they wanna do that? Are they really involved in that? Maybe they wanna do something, let them create the program and then fund it. You know what I mean? Everybody wants to be like, oh, we're gonna do this for the youth. No, let the youth do them. Because it's the same way.
Well, I think that's a good thing that I should just focus in on for a little bit. Because I mean, there's a lot of very influential people in this room, policymakers and the like. So I think this is, I think it's a good time to talk about, what some of the needs are, because one of the things that I think both you're kind of keying in on is this area of good intentions, right? That even like the most well-intentioned ideas can sometimes create oppression and injury and cause many issues, while further disenfranchising the people that they're meant to actually connect with and empower. So, I guess more for the room than anything else, like what are some of these well-intentioned ideas that we can kind of deconstruct, and what do we need more of? Like, what do you guys want to see out of the way community approaches art and the way community approaches diversity arts practice, especially?
I think that we need to make art more accessible, and I know that Surrey's doing this program with Edward where they were trying to make the art more accessible to people that might not be able to afford or access art, or not be able to have transportation to get to a location like a gallery. So being able to provide that in spaces around the city. And I think that's really important because here in Surrey we do have a huge poverty issue as well, right? And a lot of those youth at home, like I always think, like when teachers are mad at students for being late or fidgety, or maybe they're hungry, or you don't know what they experienced on their way to school that day. And so I get emotional and really passionate about these issues because a lot of times that's the troubled youth, right? those are the troubled youth that didn't have those, the benefit of maybe loving parents, reading with them at night and making their lunch, or, kissing them goodbye once they leave. And I think that as much as we can be a community that supports our most vulnerable people, that in turn then we're going to see those benefits in a reduction in crime and progressive, healthy communities. And so for me, I would really like to see more of that, like a lot more investment going into children that can't afford it, because here as well, it's one of the most expensive places to live. So we do have a ton of programming that parents can afford, and I think oftentimes kids are over-programmed, like dance and football and everything, and we have tons of recreation centers, but what are we doing to make the programming more accessible in those recreation centers to children that might not be as well off as others?
I think very valuable point, Roxanne. I think you need to really value, these are for the people that are funders, you need to really value the funding method. It's not accessible, in all honesty. It's not. A lot of times, like, I grew up in Canada, I speak English, I read well, I write well. I have difficulties writing grants because they want you to write a certain way. Now, can you imagine people who are not as fluent in English, or people who are intimidated by this, people that are actually doing groundwork, that are volunteering? How can you support them? Give them funding, find them, do that to them. And this well-intentioned thing of this hierarchy of hey, we're gonna find somebody who will do something for them. No, it's more a community based. I want my community to grow, so because it's a community, right? Human beings, I've always said this. An artist's soil is their community. If they're not growing, they're in the wrong field. And if you're not supporting your artists, then you're not going to flourish. The artists are the foundation of culture. I know that sounds weird coming from an art's trade. It's all your money, right? But it's the truth. Artists are the ones that carry culture. I left Edmonton and I'm here. I'm pollinating new grounds, right? I'm a product of Edmonton. But at the same time, the systems in which we are operating in often are oppressive, controlling, and difficult. Quick example. I applied for Poet Laureate, I got nominated for Poet Laureate, made it all the way to shortlisted, had an interview. One of the interview asked me, all older white people, right? They don't know, and none of them know what I do, but I'm entrenched in the community. I work for the city, I've done a lot of things. None of them know who I am. I'm already intimidated because these are not my peers. That's already a flaw, but whatever. I'm I'm gonna overcome it. I'm gonna play the black card, do it. So I do my thing, I do my poetry. No, it's true. These are subconscious thoughts. Honest to God, these are subconscious thoughts that go through. I'm gonna play the black card. You stop it. Do your thing. So I do my thing. I recite my poetry, and then one of the jurors asks, "Oh, is your religion gonna hinder your position?" And then in my head, what are you serious? But I can't orate that because I want this, right? Who doesn't want to be a poet laureate? So I'm like, no, it's not going to hinder this. It has nothing to do with my art making. It actually accents my art. It's beautiful, and it has nothing to do with that. I'm going to ignore that because I'm not playing the religion card. Move along. I didn't get it, but that's perfectly fine. You're not supposed to get everything. Not everything is meant for you. I want to celebrate the person who did get it. French-Canadian poet, fantastic. Pierre Recreate, fantastic poet. I want to celebrate. When I went there, one of the jurors who was there came up to me and goes, "Yo, Ahmed, I'm glad you made it out. I thought you wanted to come." I'm like, "You don't even know me, first of all. We don't even know each other." He's like, "You know what? I like your energy. You have great energy. Maybe you're a bard and not a poet. People in Africa and Arabia are bards." I'm like, these are the people you are allowing to jury. Imagine if I was somebody who was easily intimidated as an African or a poet or a black poet or whatever type of poet I am. I come in this and I see this. I'm like, I'm out of here, man. This system is racist, right? I'm not doing this. But these are the barriers that we gotta break down. We gotta equalize the playing field. A lot of people say there's no such thing as a race. If you call it a race, think about it. There's first class, second class, third. We're in a position, we're already third. We're starting from behind. It's challenging.
I have to say, a lot of the things that my peers have commented on are the same things that I think. One of the main things, and I'm actually really proud, the city of Surrey is doing wonderful work here, and I'm really proud to be a part of the building that's getting built on 10660. I can never say it really smoothly. You blame Sheila for that, though. But the building that we're building at the Parkway there across from the Chuck Bailey, the whole goal of that building is to provide accessible funding for kids that can't play hockey and play basketball. It's a place where it's not only a safe place for them to come to dance and to learn from peers, but to learn other skills like art and writing, music, all of these things. So there's people making, they recognize that they need what the need is, and they're helping us make steps towards that. That is the first step for sure. Breaking down the cultural and the systemic racism and all those other things is something that's going to take a lot longer. It's not something we can just say, well, we do this and it's going to be fixed, because it's not. But I think what we can do is recognize that kids want to unplug. They want to be with their friends. They don't want to be stuck in their little webs of being either stuck at home in poverty or stuck at home glued to their computers. And I want to read you guys this verse from these kids up in Wells this year. And Karen would remember this from the performance, but there's these 3 little boys, they're like 9 years old, and they come to me and they're like, yo, we're gonna rap. And it's like, okay. And this was their chorus. He said, my friends are getting caught up in the internet, sucked into their phones like air into a jet. I gotta break them out of this Candy Crush addiction, into the real world and out of the fiction. And I'm like, they recognize, they know, they don't want to live in this world where it's make-believe, where it's not speaking for real friendship, to coming out and playing with their friends. And so the verse, he says, my friend's hiding in his room eating some Cheerios. He can go for 3 days long as he has videos, YouTube, that's the kind he watches every day, even though his parents say he needs to go and play. Sometimes he likes that Minecraft game. I asked him if he wanted to play, he said, that's lame. I have to admit, Minecraft's pretty cool, but what would you rather have, some bricks or a pool? This is a 9-year-old kid, totally deconstructing like social media and the need to get away from his computer, and that his friend, you can see his friend is getting sucked into his phone. The kids know what they need. We just need to give them things and the access and the tools, and they will gladly come out and play again. They will gladly dance, and they will write for you. They'll make art for you. We just need to support them in that avenue, and not say, oh, well, you can't do that because you're this color or you're this race, or you're not allowed to do this because that's not what your heritage is, or that's not what your religion says. As long as we create these separate categories, and religion is one of the worst ones that we do it with, race is the next obvious easy one. We need to just kind of make people feel safe that it's okay to express their individuality and to come from a different place. And actually, the Bhangra is a great example of that, because Street Rich is working with Bhangra. Break dancers are working with Bollywood dancers. There's some guys that are Bollywood gangsters, and they're all over YouTube. They're like the happiest people. People say if you see them, people are like, I love watching you guys because you're just so happy. And it's true. You can't not watch Bhangra and just be like, I'm just happy. I just want to move like that, but my knees don't bend like that anymore. So as much as we can cross our cultures together and share the happiness that we have within each of those, whether it's through art, music, words, and sorrow and pain, that's how we're going to move forward, and that's how we're going to get these kids to move forward as well.
So, I think we've got a lot of great advice to give about fluidity, about the importance of getting into community, engaging directly, supporting what's already happening rather than trying to repackage that into something that you're more familiar with. But it'd be interesting to hear from your experience as well, as far as what hasn't worked. Of course, we all make mistakes, character building exercises, all that sort of thing. But then there's the types of mistakes that is more akin to just beating your head against a brick wall, and just causing injury. There's no benefit there. What have you guys seen that doesn't work, or what would you have done differently in your own practice? Oh, so you guys are just calling it. Wow.
I think it's like you hit on it when you said you can't repaint the bill, right? So not thinking that we need to start over again, I think that's one thing, because then you get into the whole cycle of the system. And you made some really good points about how, grant writing's not for everybody. Those tools, I don't really know exactly how to answer this in a way that sort of ties to what's wrong, because it's not that there's any one thing. It's also not something that you can easily define and say, well, this is the reason that that's not working, right? There's so many different factors that compound. But if I could give an example, I know I applied to work at the youth correctional facility, and it was the hardest job. I'm a person that's always gotten every job I've applied for. The same thing. I can write nice on paper, I can interview well, these sorts of things. And it was a very difficult process for me. And within the process, there's obvious favoritism given to Indigenous people of Indigenous ancestry to apply. And yet the numbers of people that are of Aboriginal history that work there is like this. And when I looked at that process, I thought, well, maybe that's because this process is not set up for the way that our Indigenous people are going to apply to work in this kind of a job. So when we look at the sort of ways, it's kind of like, what are some of the problems? It's kind of like one package doesn't fit for every single group, and say, this is going to be the way that you're going to go after youth in this community, because that's not going to necessarily work with this group. And that alters between different nations. You know, the Tsleil-Waututh kids don't have the same problems that the Kwantlen kids do. And to lump them all together and say, oh, well, they're all Indigenous kids, and so that this is the package for Indigenous communities. Well, there, right there, you're defeating and going against, I would say, different ways that we can move forward just by lumping people together in the same category. And I think that we do it with youth, we do it with race. That's one of the problems that I've seen.
I make a lot of mistakes, and a lot of times it's on purpose. But that's the thing, is I can't say I've done anything wrong, because even though sometimes like I'm not a hurtful, mean, aggressive person, so when I say wrong, I meant like I should have applied for that grant or whatever. Those are the type of wrongs I'm talking about. And there's nothing I look back and I'm like, man, I should have done that differently. If anything, I was to look back and be like, man, I should have done that. It was go full force into my art when I was younger, and I shouldn't have listened to the people, my friends, my families, and everybody around me telling me that it isn't possible, you can't do it, there's no such thing as making money off of art, it doesn't help you. I will just tell them, quiet, and I'll just dive into my art. But I'm still grateful where I am today, because it taught me a lot, and I can pass that on to everybody else.
Actually, I want to comment on that quickly before you move on, because it's your personal experience, and we kind of back up into community and education and everything else. It kind of speaks to the culture that we create and how much resistance and obstacles we put in the way of somebody just engaging authentically with art or anything that's more true to themselves. Right? Like I sometimes think back to my grade 11 career counselor in high school, and I mean, if I'd listened to her, which I think I did actually for a early part of my life, like I was supposed to be a data processing clerk. I mean, it's one of those pieces of software you input all the stuff that you like, and it spits out your careers. And that's what I had. And again, you know, these are people that are giving you the best advice, well-intentioned, and that's what the structure is.
I can only speak to my limited, small spectrum of life experience and the small community that I work with. I wasn't planning on saying this, but we were discussing this earlier, is that I have a really extensive youth criminal record, and I was really angry growing up. And most of that was stemmed from education system and going into high school, and the really dark negative overshadow that was being narrated about my culture and about my grandmother. And growing up in a really respectful culture with a deep, really love for my grandmother, that made me very angry. And I didn't want to learn French, I wasn't allowed to speak our language, like what had happened, and so I became really, really angry at the system, and I don't think that I've stopped that fight. I've just found new creative ways to engage people that might have people listen, and maybe have a little compassion and care about those issues. So for me, I think that that would be my biggest lesson when dealing with youth. I have 2 children, 10 and 12. I think that there needs to be structure. I think that culture saves lives. Culture definitely saved my life, and I've lost a number of people on my journey here, so I feel very fortunate that I was to make it here, and that's one of the reasons why I feel it's important to use my voice, because I feel that necessarily they're not always heard. So for me, I would say that we do listen to the youth, but still we need to guide with our own experience and intuition and embodied knowing. And for me, my kids might not want to get on the canoe, but they do every year. And when we get back, they enjoyed it. They might not have wanted to go, but they grow tremendously from it. And when they choose that they're not going to go, they're always going to have that to come back to. And that's what's going to save them. So I really always have a conversation, be open to listening, but my biggest thing would be to approach things with a lot of compassion, openness, and understanding.
Great, thanks, Roxanne. So before we close, I'm just going to throw it back to Kent here in just a minute. I think there's some strategy to having the youth panel kind of go last on a conference like this. And I think it's meant to be forward-looking and hope for the future and bright sunny ways, all that sort of thing. I guess my one question, if you guys could answer this very quickly, just so we don't go too far over time, would be, what do you guys want to see at the next Creative City Summit? Like if this audience was to take your words and go away and create some change in their own spaces, what sort of conversations, what would you guys like to see at the next summit?
I'd like to see some youth voices represented at the table. I think that's very important. And it can be in a variety, maybe it is youth from across the board, right? So that they can look and see, the kids that go to White Rock have just as many struggles as the kids that go to this school. Get them from across the border to recognize that we all have pain and we all have things that we can offer from each other, learn from each other, and listen from each other. And when you bring up the whole spectrum, that inspires the kids that maybe have gone a different way, but the kids that have gone a different way also learn from the ones that are maybe struggling. Maybe it's those kids that are in my jail, maybe it's those kids that are in those group homes, the kids that are dealing with addiction. To have representation from those aspects of society that we know are there, but we kind of push to the side, whether that's the addiction workers or the sex trade workers or whatever it is, the homeless people on the street as well, right? What's it like if you invite some of the people that are struggling off the street to come in and then have some cheese and drink water and sit down and listen to people talk? You don't know what they might have to offer and say. We don't know. I'm not saying that that you're going to get all the answers from that, but I'm just wondering how many times do we even think to do that at these sorts of events? Right?
Thanks. Last thoughts?
Really quickly, this was great. It was perfect. No, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it thoroughly. It was great, well put together. I've been to a lot of them. Not this, but like conferences and summits. I just want to say it'd be ideal if people behind the summit find people in the community that are diverse background that are doing this, who have no access to this knowledge, being it that they would never know that this type of summit was going on. They could definitely benefit from this, and you could definitely benefit from them. So look into the Southeast Asian community, the African communities. They're doing this stuff. Like, they are arts organizers doing this without funding. Find those people, bring them here, however type you want to fund them, but bring them here as well, because cross-pollination is key.
I would agree on that too, like a more diverse community, bringing in different organizations as well of just the city, but like partners, and also maybe the formatting. I think being a Creative City Summit, there's ways that we don't have to just be up here speaking, but a more interaction and something that keeps us more awake and lively, and like maybe not just sitting always staring at the front of the room, but circle of conversation, maybe some interaction and activities as well.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts, and thank you guys for the time. So we have some gifts, but before we finish completely, the City of Surrey is one of our responsibilities for the summit was artistic animation. And we were trying to think of what we could do to do some artistic animation to kind of cap things off, just a short performance of some kind of, and we were racking our brains and we were thinking, what are we going to do, who are we going to get? And all of a sudden we looked at the panel that we had on stage already, and most can dance. So we have asked Ahmed and Kia to do a short performance to kind of wrap up the summit, and they're going to do some. I won't say. I'm not going to say rap. Spoken word.
You want to do it? You gonna do it?
Yeah. You want to just stand up?
Yeah, we can just do it right here. All right, we threw this together, half an hour ago, so here we go.
So please forgive us. All right.
The first chorus, though, the reasoning is actually from one of the youth in the jail that wrote this piece, and I thought that his chorus worked well with what we were going to say, so we'll just do it.
Ready?
Okay. It's time for a reality change. I think we need to turn the page. Don't let the rage take over your brain. It will drive you insane, have you locked up in a cage or put you down in a grave.
I'm not defined by a border or a region. The lack of order from the government's only one of the many reasons. I'd never pledge allegiance. The government changing face like the weather be changing seasons. They're seedless. Funny they got branches but no roots, so how could this be treason?
It seems the state of the world, it might seem hopeless. Everywhere I look, I see kids that can't cope, and they've got no connection to the past or the present. Forget about the future, they're dreaming about heaven, not letting themselves enjoy magical moments.
Sad that we believe in a bunch of rulers. If we try to measure up, we never come out even. Now you could try to switch the metric, but they say you can't defeat me. Our life is just a game, and the system they created makes it absolutely easy to play us. 9 to 5, the minimum wage, just and those of us who are courageous, they cage us and jail us. God save us.
It's time for a reality change. I think we need to turn the page. Don't let the rage take over your brain. It will drive you insane, have you locked up in a cage or put you down in a grave. It's time for a reality change. I think you need to turn a page. Don't let the rage take over your brain. It will drive you insane, have you locked up in a cage or put you down in a grave. I'm cherishing the time that we have, that I was chosen because I can't pretend. My friends don't know me. I've been battling the dark side of the Force like Obi-Wan Kenobi, a master Jedi. Still I live a life of loneliness, rejected by my peers for my genius, like Thelonious.
I hope that the system doesn't swallow me. But if I reject to get a system, but if I resist to get a special agent to follow me, when really I'm no bad guy, but because I like to use my noodle, they consider me nutty like Pad Thai.
But the masses make erroneous assumptions if they think that we don't care about the rate of our consumption. I spit fire at lies, exposing the corruption, my desire to inspire and stop the corruption, bringing knowledge to the people, burning down the doors with the message that we bring, sharing knowledge to the poor.
Plus 9 to 5 is the only way to make it, some say. There's no one way. I'd rather be a rapper and a poet, even if it meant I stayed underground like a subway. Cause then I'd still be on track, training for my final destination. Life is one big show, and being yourself is the only way to prepare for that final presentation. Thank you.
We have some gifts for you guys, and then we're going to get out of the way.
Colin here from Kingston. Can't see him. So, wow. Thank you so much, the four of you. We really appreciate the words, kind words, and the performance and your presence here. So really, thank you so much. So we have come to the end. It's been a really emotional.
Don't you start.
You know, you imagine when you get involved on committees and things, how things might go. You think about the things that all could go wrong, that would happen, and what you imagine may happen. And this, to me, I mean, I'm a little bit biased, but it's been really an incredible summit in the holy I've been at 7 summits, and you know, I was the first timer at UConn, and I try to embrace the first timer scenario, and I feel like a first timer here, my goodness. And we were talking about, people keep saying there's strong shoes to fill next year for Halifax and the year after. And what I've said today is, and what I tried to say yesterday, it's all a condition of our experiences right now. And Halifax is going to be an incredible summit. We know it because we are the membership. It's coming from us and our place. And Halifax brings a whole bunch of new experiences and opportunities for us. And you know, our organization gets bigger and stronger because of all of us and the membership. And each summit is going to be a new experience. And so, wow. Anyway, I have shared a few tears today, which I had never imagined I was going to do at a professional summit. So there's some things have resonated. You know, you can't mention about getting out of the way. I also heard about creating space for things to happen over the last couple of days. We've heard words like truth and honesty, clarity and focus, bridging. You know, we saw that visually, and we've heard the words through these artists here today. There is so much, I think, that we can take away from our experiences over the last 2.5 days, and I do want to thank you for committing to come in numbers that we have never seen before, and at a frenetic pace of getting registered. That was an incredible experience. We've had sponsors that have come to us in numbers that we have never experienced before, and some of that again is a condition of our hosts and the place that we are here today. So there was a couple of housekeeping things, and then we're going to let you all go, and please go have a glass of wine or do something. I know I'm going to. Colin and the City of Kingston had brought forward a beautiful box gift, and I'm sure there's a few words that he wants to say. I just thought it was so great and something that every community could take away from them. And it appears from the information I saw that in a very kind of neighborhood, there are some artists and other, seems like there's a book and some wine, some industry that's happening that they've packaged in this wonderful gift box from Kingston. And that's what's going to be drawn today. So why don't you bring the box up and we can... I gotta make sure I don't pull my card out. Yeah. So Kathy Masterson. Yes, right there. So a couple things. Safe journeys on your way home, wherever that may be. As you heard earlier today, there will be an evaluation that will be sent via email in the coming days. Please respond. We'd appreciate your feedback of any kind. It is, again, as an incentive, the registration for the Halifax Summit, so I hope that's enough incentive for you to return the feedback form. If you'd like, if you want to help us and recycle your name tags, there will be a box out on the table. Please, I've been storing my key in it, so keep your personal belongings and get back into your room. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. See you all in Halifax next year.
Are you?